Push save. Okay, push save. Okay, push save. Okay, push save.
Hey,
Okay, push
uh,
save.
Amber, this is
Yes.
okay. Just checking. Sorry,
Yes.
everyone. This is the Decaturish.com Twitch show with Dan Wisenhunt. I am live with Amber Schmidtke, and I am got. Oh, I know what's going on. I had Twitch turned on my computer, so I was hearing everything twice. I'm so sorry. Let's start that again. This is Dan Wisenhunt, editor and publisher of Decaturish.com. I am here with COVID-19 analyst Amber Schmidtke. We're going to talk about COVID, and we're going to talk about Delta and what's going on with that situation. Amber Schmidtke runs COVID Digest. She's been breaking down these numbers for months now, doing really just heroic work and trying to help us all kind of make sense about what's going on. So I want to thank you for that, Amber, and find out how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Dan, for the invitation. It's a great honor to be with y'all on Decaturish.
Well, we appreciate that. We're flattered that you think it's an honor. Some people don't think that. Um, so let's. And if you're watching and you want to ask a question, sign in, give us a follow. Amber's here to help you answer these questions. So let's just start with something very broad. There is a lot of data, real time data that's coming in. It feels like by the minute, especially within the last few weeks or so. It's kind of turned everything on its head a little bit in terms of conventional wisdom. What is the overall big picture right now with COVID-19? What is the 50,000 foot view big picture that people need to be aware of?
Well, kind of like the background to your image today, Dan, the country is on fire right now with the Delta variant. So that is where we are currently. I think what we're seeing in Georgia is similar to what we've seen in other states and other nations. When Delta arrives, it quickly rises to dominance, and it leads to lots of infections that therefore lead to lots of hospitalizations. It remains to be seen what impact it's going to have on deaths. We do have a life-saving tool right now, the vaccines. The question is, have we vaccinated enough people to save those lives and prevent that loss?
So let's talk about the vaccines because I, like many of our viewers, thankfully have gotten my vaccine. I got Moderna. There does seem to be a real lack of data uh, on the effectiveness of the vaccines. I think every in terms of getting it. Now I think it's all pretty clear across the board that if you get the vaccine, you're going to be okay in the end. You're not going to probably not going to go to the hospital, and you're probably not going to die unless you have
Mm-hmm.
like an extreme age or comorbidity or both. But what's less clear to me is the effectiveness of the vaccine. So I saw a report, I think it was on Axios today, and it said that Pfizer was 40 something percent effective against the Delta variant. Moderna was 70 or 80, so I was like, yeah, Moderna. But that's still not that ain't great. What do we know right now about how this vaccine is holding up against the Delta variant, and what do we not know and need to know?
Yeah, good questions. So when it comes to the mRNA vaccines, those are the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. We should anticipate that they're going to have similar levels of effectiveness. One of the things that's really hard right now is we're getting studies from different situations, different countries with different vaccination policies, and different stages in the game, like when they experience Delta, or were they testing effectiveness against a different dominant variant at that time. So it does get to be kind of a confusing thing to see where we are. The bottom line from what we're seeing when it comes to breakthrough cases, is that for the most part, yes, the vaccines are fantastic at preventing illness. But among those who do develop a breakthrough infection, they're uncommon. But when they do happen, these folks can appear to transmit the virus as well as a person who's unvaccinated. Now, the duration of time when they're shedding virus and potentially transmitting to others will probably be a lot less than what you're seeing for an unvaccinated person because their immune system does have that head start, that memory on board of what they've seen before. And so, with the Delta variant, it has such a higher viral load than what we've seen with the previous versions of the virus. It's like 1,000 times greater. So when you're breathing, when you're coughing, when you're sneezing, you're exhaling 1,000 times more virus potentially compared to the other forms. And so when you're the person that's inhaling those particles, it's more shots on goal against your immune system. And so I think in some ways we can almost think of this like your immune system is having to deal with a much larger army that it's fighting against. And so it takes a minute for your immune system to regroup, but eventually, like you said, those people with a breakthrough case tend to have milder cases and of shorter duration because they have that head start on their immune response.
So let's talk about where we would like to be versus where we are.
Mhm.
So I think where everyone, at least in my audience, would like to be is continuing the trend that we saw going into the summer, back when everybody planned all of these festivals and things that are happening right now. Um, but where we are is a lot different. We're in the surge. Hospitals are at capacity. They don't have any, room if you get sick, even for anything, COVID or not. What is I'm frustrated because I go out and I wear my mask,
Mhm.
and I haven't really stopped. Like even when the CDC said, "Yeah, don't wear your mask," I mean, I'm gonna wear it to the grocery store. I kind of, I mean, I'm not saying I'm smarter than the average bear or anything, but it just seemed to make sense to me. Like we're not out of the woods, but even now, I went to a car repair shop, to have my vehicle worked on. Nobody was wearing. Nobody in the waiting room was wearing a mask. And this is Metro Atlanta. This is not the sticks, okay? It's Metro Atlanta. Nobody's wearing their mask. Nobody. The person who was working on my car, I was like, hey, can you make sure you wear a mask when you work on my car on the inside because I have a son who can't get vaccinated. Which is a preface to how protected are you if you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated with one of the vaccines, and you're wearing a mask and you're still doing all the mitigation type stuff? Because we're being forced to, the people who have done the right things are being forced to interact with knuckleheads who aren't doing the right things, probably have never done the right things and don't care. So we really got to kind of look out for ourselves at this point, until things change on a leadership level. How safe are you, with those mitigation measures in place?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to say thanks for getting fully vaccinated, and thanks to all your viewers for doing that. I'm too fully vaccinated. Three-fourths of my family are fully vaccinated. We're just waiting on, like you, a pediatric vaccine to be approved, and we will be right there. So any day now, I would love that to happen. It is frustrating, and I fully relate to that because like you, I'm having to continue to do all these things. I think that it goes back to kind of something we've talked about on a previous episode together, which is when we talk about mitigation strategies, our vaccines are kind of like another piece of Swiss cheese. So, to refresh your viewers who may not know what I'm talking about, we tend to think of risk and safety as a spectrum, not a finish line. We don't get to declare safe or unsafe. We have spectrums of safety where we have the most unsafe and we have the safest options over here. And with a disease like COVID-19 that transmits the way that it does, you want to put as many barriers between yourself and the threat as you can. And the barriers that we have, none of them are completely perfect, although the vaccines are as perfect as we could hope for at this point. But they still have some vulnerabilities, as you see with the breakthrough infections. So, in some ways, and if we think of those mitigation strategies as pieces of Swiss cheese because they do have those vulnerabilities, you can imagine a virus finding its way through those holes and still getting to you. We prevent that virus from reaching you by layering those stacks, those pieces of cheese together or layering those strategies together to reduce the chances of a viral particle getting through those barriers that you've set up. I typically recommend using 2 to 3 strategies at all times. And so when the case rates are low, like they were leading up to the summer surge, then if you were a fully vaccinated person, there's 2 of your things. If you're doing something outside, you're good to go. But or maybe you're inside but you're wearing a mask. Those are your 3 strategies, because you can count on low case rates. We aren't in that position anymore. We don't have low case rates. And so even though we're fully vaccinated, it means that we still have to add 2 more things, ideally, at all times, to keep ourselves safe and the people that we may live with who can't be vaccinated at this point. Now, when it comes to the frustration that you feel, I totally get it, right? I know that I've been beating the drum for these vaccines since December, and it seems frustrating that people aren't doing it. And there is a contingent of people who just flat out refuse. They do not want to do this at all. We still have some people that are on that wait and see fence. Allegedly, one of the things that they cite as a thing that will move them off that fence is getting full FDA approval. We expect that any day now. So that may move some people, but the thing that will really do, honestly, is pave the way for vaccine requirements, for entry to certain businesses, and we're seeing that start to unfold. Different organizations, state government, not Georgia necessarily, but in other states, you're starting to see that. So it's possible that will help our vaccination rates. But the way we overcome this, the way we get to the normal that you're hoping to achieve, is through vaccination. Because again, those vaccines aren't perfect, but the more we vaccinate, we reduce that risk of infection that much more for the people that are around us. And if we can overlap those pieces of Swiss cheese, then we're all better off, right? So
What would you
I think that's the
tell?
path.
What would you? And I'm going to get to some. Thank you all for joining us. We got a lot of people in the room right now. I know some of you have questions for Dr. Schmidtke. Please, please, please sign up, give us a follow, and ask your questions. I got one I'm going to get to. But and talking about navigating this world, so what would you tell somebody, let's say, who has to work in a service-oriented job right now? There is no, this unemployment's running out. There are no safety nets. They have to be at work. That is their livelihood. They might be fully vaccinated, but they're possibly interacting with members of the public who are not. In fact, they likely are.
Mhm.
What advice can you tell them or give them to help them sort of take care of themselves, to protect themselves as much as possible in that situation?
I think, if you're a person that's in that position, of course, I want you to be vaccinated. It's the best protection we can have on a standalone basis. Again, it's not perfect. So, what I would also want is for us to get you a high quality mask. And I'd encourage you to wear it. And it doesn't matter what your customers say, like wear it. And so when I mean a high quality mask, we're talking about probably a KN95 or greater. And the reason for that is, unlike the cloth masks, where really the benefit is if the person who's sick is wearing it, and then we get additional protection if you, as the uninfected person, also wear it. With a filtering mask like the KN95, for example, you're less dependent on the good decisions of other people. You have a little bit more protection because of the step that you have taken. And so it's not as much of a group project at that point. So if you are a person in a service industry, I fully get it. Look, if we don't work, our kids don't eat. So for 100%, I understand that needs to happen. So the way that we keep you safe as much as we can is vaccinating, making sure you're wearing a good mask, observe good hand hygiene. So, make sure you're washing your hands frequently, and just avoid close contact as much as you can.
So we're going to get to some questions. Laura says, at this point, what are the differences between the Delta variant compared to the prior COVID-19 strains in the United States? And by differences, she means the symptoms.
Okay. So far, the symptoms are kind of the same, but with Delta, there's some evidence that it may be a little bit more severe. So the same kind of symptoms, but people are having more severe ones. And the reason we think this may be happening is because it ties back to that viral load thing. So if you have more copies of the virus inside of your body, that's more cells that it's infecting. And so it's possible that that can trigger greater symptomology. So I think this is still an evolving situation where we don't fully know all the answers to everything. But that's what I think is going on most likely.
So, well, I've heard things with Delta, like maybe you have more of a sore throat. There's some stuff like that going on. I don't know if you know of any other like distinct. And I guess the other question I have about Delta too is the state doesn't really seem to be making any distinction between the previous version and the current version. I don't know that any states are. So how do we know that this is a Delta-driven surge?
Right. So the way we get that. So first of all, let me back up to what you were saying about the sore throat thing. Yes, that's quite possible. I'm hearing anecdotal reporting all over the place, but I haven't seen really solid data. One thing that I heard a physician say, who was an ER physician, was that with the breakthrough cases, one of the big symptoms he's seen really is just extreme fatigue. So if you're fully vaccinated and you're just laid out, just tired, that was the thing that he's been noticing most commonly. Again, that's anecdotal reporting. I don't have a clear, cross-sectional view of what that looks like on a widespread basis, but that's kind of that. Now, when it comes to how do we know this is Delta, the biggest clue we have is the sequences that are, or the specimens that are being sequenced and the data repositories that are held by CDC and elsewhere. If there's a website you can go to, I believe it's nextstrain.org, where it shows you what the different proportions of variants that they're observing are from each state. And they can do it regionally and nationally too. And so for Georgia, I think we're well above 80% of the specimens that are being sent for sequencing are coming up as Delta. So previously it was the Alpha variant from the United Kingdom, and now it's the Delta variant that has risen to dominance.
And is Delta a more lethal variety of COVID, and how so? How is that measured?
So I don't know that it's going to be more lethal. I mean, it has the potential to be that way if we didn't have a vaccine, for example. But because we do, we're going to have to see what happens there. I think the big thing with Delta is its increased transmissibility. So whereas the original variant, and we've had a what's called an R naught factor or value of 2 to 3. That means that on average, a person who was sick would go on to infect 2 to 3 additional people. When it comes to Delta, the CDC data that was leaked, I think, 2 weeks ago, um, estimated that it's somewhere in a range of like 6 to 9. So I usually hover around 7 because that feels like a good mid-range number. But what that tells us is that a single person who's infected can go on to infect 7 additional people. Each of those can go on to infect 7 people. So when we're seeing this big run on hospitals and it seems more dramatic than it was in previous surges, it's because there's a lot more people sick at once. And so, when you have that greater shots on goal, more people infected, even if we were still dealing with the same hospitalization rate as we were seeing before, because there are more people sick, there are more people needing a hospital. What's different this time around, we're noticing, is what's happening with kids. So there seems to be more hospitalizations among kids than there were with previous surges. And so it could be because of the difference with the Delta variant, the fact that it has a higher viral load. It could also be because we've really relaxed a lot of the protections that were in place for kids up until now. So it's hard to really kind of tease out what is contributing to that increase in need for hospitalizations for kids.
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert like you are, but I would imagine, just them being the population that's unvaccinated, uh, you know, contributes to it as well. Which on that front, I am almost at the point of calling the FDA every day and saying, "Have you got my kid's vaccine approved yet? What's going on with that? And why are they not moving heaven and earth to get this done? What is the holdup?"
Oh goodness, I wish I knew, Dan, because trust me, I would be beating down their door too. And honestly, I think you can sense the rage that's building among kids of the unvaccinated population or age group. Just what in the world are you doing? And, on the one hand, we want to make sure that these studies are done to completion. We want to make sure that we have adequate data to improve confidence in the vaccine. At the same time, we're in an emergency. We have a surge in cases going on right now, and many of the states in the country are not pulling any brake levers to make it slow down. This is in and amongst kids going back to school. We know from past experiences that schools can be, sort of hot spots for disease transmission when it comes to things like measles, pertussis, influenza, other sorts of diseases that happen to be respiratory. And so, it's not unpredictable that we would see COVID outbreaks take place in schools. So what are we doing to protect those kids? If we can file an emergency use authorization for adults, and we're in an emergency right now, why in the world are we not seeing this? Unfortunately, I don't have eyes on the inside of the FDA, so I don't know what their holdup is specifically. However, I do know that because of some of the rare reports of myocarditis or that we were seeing in the 12 to 17 population, I think there was they asked for more extensive follow-up with the kids under the age of 12 to see if they were seeing any of those rare instances take place. One thing we do know about the pediatric vaccines is it will be a reduced dosage compared to what is being used for everybody 12 and up, at least for Pfizer. And so, part of the study and why it's taking much longer is because they've had to prove that a reduced dosage works well. And then sometimes they have to wait until they have enough cases identified to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of the vaccine. So that's a long answer and unfortunately not a satisfying answer because I want the vaccine just as badly as you do.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the missing piece for me. Like that's the one because we did. It was a tough decision, but in-person learning we feel
Mm-hmm.
is best for him. And thank God I do want to give a quick shout out to DeKalb County Schools for not only demanding that everyone wear masks, but telling the anti-mask people to kindly buzz off. That was so bravo. Like that's a really great response. I hope they will uh, get with the program on mandating that teachers get this stuff, get the vaccine, mandating that students get it. Hopefully they'll get closer to that with full FDA approval. Um, but yeah, I think that is the missing link for a lot of people, and for me, just being like, okay, I can breathe a little bit. But I know everybody's mileage may vary in these public school situations. We did see I wouldn't say quite a bit. It was still relative. It was like 14% of all the schools. And it was, it was not great, but it felt like it was coming in from being brought in from the outside. Do we have any sense yet of the transmission that's going on in schools, and do we have that broken down by people who have mask mandates and people who school districts that have mask mandates and school districts that do not?
It's been a while since I've looked at the literature on that, so I don't want to speak on that necessarily and say something that's wrong. What I will say is that in the past, we've seen that there's a lot more I want to say it was adult to adult transmission within the school setting, like in the teacher break room or that sort of thing, than there was necessarily peer to peer. And especially if you were talking about schools with a mask requirement. We really saw that really did help between that and the social distancing that was taking place in schools to really limit transmission. So we're just going to have to, especially though the studies that we do have are based on last year's virus in the last school year. But this is Delta and it's very different. And so, I would be remiss to say how much, or I would be reluctant to say a lot about what we learned from school transmission last year, since it's almost virtually a different virus at this point.
So, a couple of things I'm hearing about anecdotally, I just wanted to find out. I've heard of parents potentially fudging the age of their child. Maybe they have a particularly tall, you know, 9 or 10 year old. I assume that's not a bright idea to give them a dose of the vaccine. What are your thoughts on that?
I can empathize completely. There have been times that I look at my 10-year-old and I'm like, he's taller than my 11-year-old or my 12-year-old, and he's heavier. And I don't see, but at the same time, those studies have not been done. And so it is a risk. There is some discussion that, or I have seen some sort of hypotheses going around that once full FDA approval is granted, pediatricians could potentially do off-label vaccination among kids under the age of 12. However, I don't think that that's going to be done in a widespread manner. There's just too much liability involved. So I think that we are unfortunately kind of stuck until the FDA issues an EUA for the under 12 population. I think that, like you said, it's frustrating. You want your kid to have a fighting chance against this virus, right? And so it's important to, want to provide that protection as much as we can. But unfortunately, I just don't think we're there yet.
So if you are joining us, we have quite the crowd today. So thank you everyone who's joining us. This is the Decaturish Twitch show. Our guest is COVID analyst Amber Schmidtke. You've probably seen her all over Twitter, all over Facebook. Her work has really been a guiding light for a lot of people who care about science and care about public health. So if you would like to ask her a question, go on ahead and create yourself a Twitch account, give us a follow, and jump in there. I see a lot of people I'm sure have questions that haven't jumped in. Dr. Schmidtke has been very gracious with her time today, so please, if you have a question, let's hear them. So I want to talk about the boosters for a second, because we have had a lot of back and forth. There's been some talk about, I think Israel might be administering a third shot to certain age categories. What's going on there? What's going on? Are we going to need a booster? When can we get? I mean, I'm kind of at the point where I would take the shot every month if they told me that's what I had to do. But where are we with that?
Yeah, no, and I can relate to that too. I think that what we're really kind of looking at the importance of getting people who are unvaccinated vaccinated, and not because of equity piece. Although equity is important, I think that statistically it makes more sense to reduce the risk of infection among more than reduce the risk of infection among a select group of people. Now, there are certain, for example, those who are immunocompromised who do not mount as robust of an immune response as a person who is normal, I guess I would say. And so for those, it may make sense to go ahead and give them a booster. But in the United States, we have to rely on the to give that guidance. It's very hard to find pharmacists or others that will administer vaccine outside of that EUA's language.
So I have, again, anecdotal. In fact, a couple of my friends were saying, "Well, I'm just going to go and shot. I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm just going to get it. They won't know the difference." And I've been like, "Are you sure? Like, are you really going to do that?" Because we've been having this discussion about how nobody believes the science, nobody trusts science. But then you've got people who are smart, educated people who've done all the right things, sort of a step ahead of it. And I feel like in a way that's not helpful. So what are your thoughts on people who are taking it upon themselves to get a booster, which is really probably just a dose of a Pfizer or a Moderna or the J&J?
Yeah, we saw some of this early on, had real limitations on who was eligible for the vaccine. We saw teachers and others crossing state lines in order to get, which you know what, it made sense at the time, sense that, if you're a teacher and you're in that environment and it makes you and more protected, that made sense. I don't know that, well, let me just put it this way, vaccinated, and I am not planning to do any sort of booster shot at this point. I don't think it's necessary. And so that's why I'm choosing not to do that. You can see how logistically a person with that idea, it will probably, because unfortunately it does not seem like our vaccines getting well across state lines. So for example, we vaccinated my 12-year-old while we were on vacation, 2 separate vacations, 3, because we do a lot of camping. And so he got his first dose in Missouri, and then he got his second dose in Colorado. And I get text messages from both state health departments saying, we need to get your son's vaccine completed. Obviously, they're not talking to each other, but and so but we live in Kansas. That's the other thing. It's like his vaccine isn't being recorded where it needs to be, even though we provided the code to each of those vaccine providers. So, sorry, that was a side tangent for looking for, but
Yeah, I've just been a little bit frustrated on where people, who I know are doing the right things,
Mhm.
are sort of taking it upon themselves to something that, I'm not sure that you should do. Unless I'm kind of like do it. I'm going to go do it. That's kind of where I'm at. People like you went to college to figure this. Me, that's I went to college to, you know, not work for a living. That's why I'm in journalism. But
Well, we need you. Yay.
I appreciate that. I do work sometimes. But anyway, we are coming up on 6:30. Do you mind sticking around with us a little bit more? In case.
Sure.
Okay, great. So much for your time. Um, Talk about sort of the policy side of this.
Mhm.
We ran an ad recently, and we said that schools need to mandate vaccines for their teachers. And employers, anybody in the public sector, really needs to, as a policy choice. And nobody in the public sector has really made a move on that. How important is it public entities do that, and then what is the likelihood that in a timely fashion?
Well, we are seeing it in certain public sectors. For example, the House announced that the entire federal workforce is going to be required to be vaccinated. So that is an example. The military has also gotten that notice. We're seeing it pop up in certain city and county jurisdictions, not necessarily in Georgia. I think, if you look outside of Georgia, we are seeing movement on that. And I think that the more we see that, the president built but really, once we get full FDA approval, it kind of greenlights that requirement pass or requirement expect for anybody. I think there's a lot of hesitation among certain agencies or that they don't want to be sued over or a vaccine, and so they've been hesitant to do so. But honestly, as soon as that FDA approval is granted, I would not be surprised if they've already got the policy to push submit as soon as that news comes out.
So, as far as we know, that's a done deal. Be fully approved. Like, there's nobody expecting it won't be.
I don't expect to. And honestly, what they're doing right now is not necessarily looking at the effectiveness or safety of the vaccines anymore. I mean, they still keep an eye on those
Sure.
things, but that's already been proven. What they're doing now is going through like the manufacturing process and making sure that like all of the administrative of vaccine manufacture and distribution are being done correctly. So these are really sort of the last I's to be dotted, the last to be crossed. But the crux of FDA approval, that work is more or less already done. That's why you saw that there was sort of a new there where, the FDA director said we're going to bring in everybody on evenings and weekends until this is done because they're in that last push. And so it just needs to be finished. And that's why when I hear that, but also know that we don't have a pediatric vaccine, I'm like, keep that evening and weekend work
Right.
up, right? Because I want to see that yesterday. So
Yeah. You can also multitask. Ask me how I know how to multitask. Um. Laura. Once there's FDA approval, what exemptions will people be able to use when required to get vaccine by work or school?
So, if different states have different exemptions, all 50 states have a medical exemption. So, if you are who has had anaphylaxis in the past, for example, or you're allergic to the vaccine or something like that, you can get a medical waiver. Some states offer a religious exemption, cite a religion that perhaps Jehovah's Witness, for example. There's others that getting a vaccine. The state policies differ, and so you would need to look up what's going on for you. A few rare states that also offer a philosophical objection where you don't really have to provide a reason. You just say, I don't want. Thankfully, because I'm a public health person, we don't have a lot of states with the philosophical objection thing. But we do have states with every state has a 50 or all 50 states in US have a medical exemption and a few of them have a religious one too.
So, Laura, asking that question about this, I know that they have plans to go to Bonnaroo, the big music festival, this year, and Bonnaroo has made news recently where they said basically you have that you're vaccinated when you show up, or they're going to give you your money back home, or you have to take a negative COVID test. You get a negative COVID test on site.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think? Do you think that will be effective? Do you think that that's all that other music festivals and events should follow going forward?
I think it makes sense. People want to be able to see their musicians, go to sports, and feel safe in that environment. They want to be able to just relax. And you're terrified that somebody around you is going to cough on you. So the safest way to have that enjoyable experience is by people that don't have COVID. And so I think sense from a consumer point of view to require vaccination or proof of a negative test. What we've said about testing from the is that a test tells you that you're negative on the day that it was collected. So it's important that it be like there's talking about a rapid test, for example, on entry. That way we have relative confidence that nobody should be transmitting virus during that event. So it does make sense to me. I know consumer myself, it would make me feel a lot more comfortable about going to a venue. We're seeing restaurants that are starting to, and so, I would kind of prioritize some of those restaurants if it were up to me, especially with an unvaccinated kid. I feel a lot more comfortable. We haven't been inside of a restaurant in 17 months.
Laura Laura mentions required to get into the stage area only and not the campground. So that's
oh,
yeah.
well, best, right? Because what
Yeah.
happens in the concert and stage area can look very different. You can have mosh pits or people gathering together, dancing, whatever, and that's often close. That's
Right.
something we want to make sure of, that, especially that those folks are ideally COVID free as much as possible. Yeah, that's what's nice about camping. We do a ton of camping. You can make it very pandemic proof if you want to. Depends on what people choose to do. Just I would remind people that when you gather people from outside your household, you're buying their risk too. You're buying the that they had prior to that event. And so just understand that if it's somebody else and you have a similar level of risk tolerance, then I think you can go ahead and have a good time together. It's kind of like a bubble from before.
Right. Right. What so let's talk about policy. There's long-term policy that we're working towards, which is approval. Hopefully, some vaccine mandates coming. Oh, by the way, before we get to that, if any restaurant owner is listening right now and want to publicity, be the first one in Decatur to mandate vaccines and negative COVID tests, because a number of people in the community will stand up and applaud you. But what can be done on a short-term policy basis? Because even Decatur, when this started, led the way. And we're going to have a mask mandate. We don't care what the governor says. And of course, like most things, actually folded like a lawn chair when it came right down to it. And they kept their mask mandate, and that was that. But they led during the summer, and they were asked to consider bringing it up again, and they said no. They said we're not going to do. So, what is your interpretation of that? Because it feels like I'm not a public health expert. I'm not dealing with the level of data we are making these decisions. But what's your read on that? Why would a government like Decatur probably has a ton of CDC people living limits? Certainly is right by the CDC. Certainly has a higher than average rate of infection. Has led the way on a lot of fronts. Why would the city of not renew the mask mandate at this point? And what's your read on them deciding not to? And the reason they
Yeah,
decided not to is because they cited the vaccination rate. Sorry to interrupt.
they did what?
They
What'd you
cited the
say?
vaccination rate. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt.
Yeah, so if you look on a zip code or census tract level, it's possible that the vaccination rate in city of Decatur is fantastic. Like you said, it's home to the CDC. It probably has a lot of, vaccinated people. So I also can't see necessarily what they are using to make their decisions. What I will say is, the pandemic is not happening in a vacuum. There's other confounding things that they're having to weigh and consider. And so, but the reality that I think I would remind people of is that this virus doesn't recognize city boundaries, and Decatur has a lot of cross traffic from other parts of the city, other parts of the state. And so I guess I would just understand that you're only as safe as the most dangerous person that just entered your area. And so, or most infectious, maybe not the most dangerous. We're not talking about crime here. We're talking about infectiousness.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, yeah, you're only as safe as the person that's most transmissible in your community. And so I think that, you can go this route and try to go the personal responsibility thing. But what we've seen through the course of the pandemic is that unfortunately, we can't rely on personal responsibility here. Public health is public. It requires a public coordination of individual efforts. It's not enough to say, we want you as an individual to do this. It really is community organization and mobilization towards a particular goal. And so I think that in some ways we're seeing an abdication of that responsibility. And I don't know if it's because next year is an election year. And I don't know for city of Decatur, forgive me, I don't follow their politics as strictly as I do other areas.
I mean,
But
they're more likely to get voted out for not doing the mask mandate, if I'm being real.
mm-hmm,
So I'm a little confused by what their reticence is. I mean, they're not the mask police. No, I don't think
mm-hmm,
anybody went out and ticketed anybody for not wearing a mask. But leadership is often about gestures and symbolism more than anything else. And even as a gesture, that's leadership. That's saying, we're going to do this. You should do this too. There's potential consequences of doing that. So, yeah, I mean, it is an election year. I don't know that. I do know there's going to be one contested school board race, but that doesn't have any bearing on this. I don't know that there's going to be a contested city race, but if there were, I would imagine the failure to renew a mask mandate would be something that would be more likely to get them voted out of office in this particular community than not. And so that's kind of where I was like, huh? Why wouldn't you do it? It just I don't get where they're coming from. It seems like such a no-brainer, easy step to take from a policy perspective. And I don't know if it's because the emergency order expired. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, the thing is with the state letting the emergency order lapse, it really gives local jurisdictions a lot more flexibility to do what they want. So they do have the ability to do it. It's just an issue of uh, what their prerogative is at this point. And so I think that, like you pointed out, it is a gesture, but not only that, it provides legal top cover for people like the business owners that want to protect their employees and their customers by requiring masks inside of their store or shop or whatever. It's a lot easier to point to a sign and say, we're doing it because the city of Decatur says so. Instead of having that confrontation with a customer, you can point to a higher authority. And that's a lever that CDC unfortunately kind of gave away when they said that masks are kind of optional, or not optional, forgive me, when they said that the unvaccinated didn't, or that the vaccinated no longer needed to wear a mask. It left too much ambiguity for people. And so unfortunately, it kind of removed that top cover for a lot of businesses.
So, short of a full statewide lockdown, which I don't think is going to happen, what are some short term sort of policy things that the state can do to at least take some of the pressure off of the hospitals right now? What can they do short of locking everything down again?
Yeah, I also don't want to lock down. I'll be the first to say that. I don't know that it is productive, and we have tools. We know how to do things relatively safely. I don't see the need for a lockdown. However, it's clear that something needs to happen. This is not something that we can just cope with. We are still, or the state of Georgia is still early in its Delta surge. And we're already seeing full diversion in the city of Atlanta and elsewhere throughout the state. So I think that we have to get ahead of the virus and we have to prevent as much disease as we can. So I want them to vaccinate as many people as they can, but we know that vaccination, getting to that full vaccination status, can take anywhere from 2 weeks if you're getting the Johnson and Johnson vaccine to 6 weeks if you're getting the Moderna vaccine. So in the meantime, we need to pull all of our levers. So we need to be instituting mask requirements. We need to be potentially talking about what do we do to limit transmission in our high touch environments. So that could be restaurants and bars. I want these businesses to survive. I've been supporting them as much as I can with takeout and other means. But what can we do to maybe move that party outside? Or what can we do to reduce the crowding that happens inside of those spaces and still support those businesses as best as we can? But, it's a lot of the stuff we've been doing. We just need to have the courage to do it.
So we're going to close with kind of a big picture thing, and I've very much tried to not turn this into a therapy session, but I feel so angry. I feel just angry at the people who act. I feel like that those of us who have acted responsibly, unfortunately, have to pay for the mistakes of people who just don't give a shit. They're not going to do anything. They were never going to do anything. They're not going to do anything, even if you're, forcing them to do it. Um, so, what advice would you give to those of us who I'm sure you're in a similar boat, who are just pissed off that we're still dealing with this crap? And how are we supposed to navigate the world going forward? Because I got to be honest with you, there are days where I just want to be like, you know, Jesus take the wheel. It's. I mean, there's nothing that I feel like I have any personal control over besides what I do and my family does. You know what I mean? So not to get all deep and philosophical, but how are you dealing with that? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah. I have to step back for a minute and think of this like I talk to my kids when it comes to like when they notice how somebody else isn't wearing their bike helmet, for example.
Hmm.
And I don't know about your kids, but mine will embarrass the crap out of me with that mess. They will be like, "Oh, Josie's not wearing her helmet," and I'm like, I don't actually know that kid. I don't know their parents, and their parent is right there. So thanks for that side of judgment that you've just given them, even though I completely support you, but you're doing it. And so I have to remind my kids, for example, I am not everybody's mother and I cannot control what other people do. We just get to control what we do, and we need to do the best we can in that environment. Now, wearing a bike helmet is a much different situation than wearing a mask or getting vaccinated, because the risk to Josie is just to herself. The risk for us when we're not wearing a mask or not being vaccinated is widespread. So it's a very different situation. And so I think for me, yeah, life is not fair. And this is one of those really just in your face reminders of that situation. We have, unfortunately, a big social contract disconnect right now. We have identified that there is a subset of society that just is not moved emotionally or in any other way by the death of 600,000 Americans. And that is something that science can't solve. That is something that we need faith members and people that are, big into ethics. We need to have sort of a come to Jesus, since you brought him up, when it comes to what it means to be human and what it means to care about other people, and who in the world raised you to not think that way. And so, yes, I understand. And you can sense my frustration is right there with you, Dan, because I am, yeah, I'm pretty tired at this point too of what's going on. But at the same time, I think the more we can do to, I think honestly, a piece of hope that I can offer is that there was reluctance to vaccinate with all the vaccines that we've ever really developed. And so, but we have eradicated smallpox. We have pushed polio to the brink. We have really strongly reduced how much chickenpox is experienced by American children. And so in Australia, they virtually wiped out cervical cancer with the HPV vaccine. So we will get there. It's just not on a timeline that we want. And I think that when the FDA approval comes and we see the vaccine requirements go into place, we're going to see vaccination rates rise, because people won't have a choice if they want to continue to have certain jobs or if they want to go to certain places. And I don't like that that's what it's going to take for us to get there. But if that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. But I will say there is hope. It is going to get better. I wish it would get better faster, but this is like the biggest group project we've ever been a part of, and a significant part of our team is not pulling its weight.
Worst group project ever, as
I'm a
somebody
college professor. Trust me, I know exactly what I'm talking about with
somebody
this.
said on Twitter the other day. We posted that on our Facebook. Amber, Amber, thank you so much for joining us. Real quick, if people want to follow your work and support what you do, how can they do that? Can you let our viewers know?
Yeah, so I have a newsletter that's on the Substack platform. If you type in Georgia COVID Digest, you will find it. It's the first thing that pops up on Google. But it's amberschmidtkephd.substack.com. And I know my last name's hard to spell, so I just tell people to Google it. You can also find me on
I
all the
sympathize.
socials. So yeah, I suppose you do know. But yeah, you can find me on the socials and that sort of stuff. So
And when people want to, can they support you financially through Substack?
yeah, there is a mechanism through Substack to, I kind of view it as like an NPR funding model. Nobody
Hmm.
has to pay for access to the newsletter, but for those who choose to do so, there's a mechanism to do that either on a sustained basis or a one time contribution.
Well, the work is certainly worth supporting. You've been there from the beginning, and you were, telling people how it was going to be before a lot of other people fully grasped it. So, Amber, thank you so much for joining us. To all of our viewers, thank you so much for joining us and tuning in. Thank you for submitting your questions. We will be back next week. Please get your vaccine. We are getting, I believe, qualifying for our local races are next week, so we'll probably do some sort of an election-themed preview show next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. We'll be here every Wednesday at 6 o'clock. We'll probably be here more times during the week as elections get fired up and we do some of these local forums. But until next Wednesday, wear your mask, get your vaccine, and we'll talk to you then. Bye-bye, everybody.